Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This episode is brought to you by L1 Automotive Training and Keith Perkins. If you're looking for education on module programming, J2534, EEPROM work, key and immobilizer, electrical diagnostics, or drivability diagnostics, Keith has a website, l1training.com, that's got over 60 hours of training videos on all those subjects and more. When I first started out doing mobile, I utilized Keith's videos on module programming in J2534 in order to get my head wrapped around what I would need for the tooling, the computers, the software setups, what kind of obstacles I would be up against when I'm out there programming modules on cars. And it was a huge benefit to me. And I continue to use the training videos that he has on his website. So I strongly recommend checking out l1training.com. We have got Auto Rescue Tools and Isaac Rodell as a sponsor for this podcast. Hey guys, if you're looking for programming laptops, you want the laptop set up ready to go for programming control modules on vehicles, you need key cutting equipment, you need diagnostic tools, Isaac is your guy. Has all that stuff available for purchase, and the support that he offers along with the purchase has been outstanding. I bought some stuff from him in the past. I got my Dolphin key cutting tool from him several years back. And again, the support has been phenomenal. Helped me out along the way with anything additional I needed to make it work for me. So make sure to check that out as well. Again, that's autorescuetools.com. The link will be in the show notes. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping, and I'll be your host once again for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. On the show this week, I've got Chris Higgins. Chris is joining me. He's going to tell everybody about his journey and experiences in the automotive world, being a dealership technician, a field service engineer for General Motors, and a technician in the independent world. And he's going to share some case studies with us. This was great to meet Chris. He's actually not too far from me. So I always like meeting people that are local to me. That's pretty cool. But anybody that's passionate in the automotive world is always a great discussion. So I enjoyed this quite a bit. I think you will as well. With that out of the way, let's jump in. Good evening, Chris. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, Sean. How about yourself?
I cannot complain. The temperature here dropped. It was 100 on Tuesday, and then it was like 65 the next day, and it was about that today too. And it's just amazing. So for all of you down in Arizona and Florida, I'm sorry, but it is absolutely beautiful up here in Minnesota right now. So doing the mobile gig is just perfect right now. I got no complaints.
That's awesome. I share probably the similar weather as you do here, just north of Fargo. I kind of work in the Moorhead area. Very similar weather. Winters are really cold, and summers it's hard to escape the heat and humidity sometimes.
Cool. Have you always been around that area or what?
I was born and raised in Fargo, raised in Lidgerwood, North Dakota on a farm. In a nutshell, went to high school there, worked part-time, went to North Dakota State College of Science, and I received my associate's degree in automotive technology. From there, I moved up to Fargo. This would have been in 06 or 07. I started at Gateway Chevrolet in town, which is a Chevrolet dealer. Started in Quick Lube, got kind of stuck in there for a year or two, and finally clawed my way into the shop. Did the dealer thing until about 2013. Halfway through that, I was a Hyundai Nissan technician as well, too. I achieved a gold certification as a Hyundai technician. From there, just kind of how things played out, I moved to the independent world. And from there, I got the opportunity to be a GM field service engineer. And that was a great opportunity. But for local reasons, technicians, and just being in the automotive field for so long, a great opportunity opened up at home. And it keeps me closer to home too. So yeah, I recently got back in the independent world in March or April. And I'm loving it right now. The shop owner is receptive to my ideas, implementing a lot of different stuff. And we recently are moving into a rather large shop. We're selling 2 small shops eventually and moving into our large one.
Okay.
So yeah, a lot of great things are happening. It's busy. I love it. And I love everything I've learned along the way with the different shops and companies and corporations I've worked for.
Yeah, that sounds like quite a bit of various experience and perspectives throughout through the industry. How does one become or get to the point of like a field service engineer with a company? I mean, like GM, but I guess any of them, I don't even know what the process is. Like, do you set out to do that? Or is it something where you're recognized in, doing what you're doing, like, hey, you might be a good fit for this? Or is this something you have to pursue? Or is it pursued at all? Maybe people don't like doing it. I don't know. I really know very little about the dealership world.
Yeah, no, for me, we'll rewind a little bit. It was kind of a jump for me because I was in the dealership world and out of it for 4 or 5 years. And then one of my close friends that I met at one of my kids' soccer practice once was actually our AC Delco distributor for the shop I worked at. And then he was moving up. AC Delco and GM are kind of hand in hand, basically one family, different divisions. And he had told me that they were going to add a bunch of field service engineers. And he's like, he thought I'd be really good at it because he kind of saw the work I did in the shop and stuff like that. So I'm like, well, how does one go about it? And he's like, well, get your resume ready. When you go online, and he kind of showed me where to go to apply and submit your resume. It was a long, tedious process, but well worth it. From when I submitted my resume and application, it was about a 5-month process till I actually got onboarded. Initial interview with people in the resource office, and then like team leaders from the field service engineering team. There's 4 different ones, and you had 2 separate interviews with 2 at a time. And yeah, from there, it was kind of a hurry up and wait deal. Get the okay, accept the job. And then from there, it was kind of a lot at once, getting a lot of stuff sent to you, getting your laptop. And then, the heartbreaking deal, because the shop I was at, the owner, he was really good to me. So actually, putting my notice in at that time, that one was a tough one. But all the cool people I've met when I was a field service engineer, I mean, I wouldn't have traded it for the world. It was kind of an eye opener as to, I was always a very good producer and, an average tester diagnoser, but just a different way of thinking that I gathered while being a field service engineer. There's always the cars that kick our butts nowadays, but it gives me a whole perspective at looking at a vehicle and our process, our diagnostic strategy that everyone approaches a vehicle with. Mm-hmm. But so I did the field service engineering gig that got me really. You guys talk about like the Pico scope, the U scope. Shout out to AES Wave here, Sean. They should have given you some kickback. You should see my. I never knew about AES Wave until I heard it from your podcast, and I'm like, holy crap! I did end up buying my own before I left. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I say, yeah, it's such a cool little tool. It's fantastic.
Yeah, the U scope. I never even know there was a cool pocket size 1-channel scope until I started searching around and add to cart, and I'm like, oh, here we go there. And then I bought a Pico 4225 from there too. Just the 2-channel scope was more in my budget. And yeah, I've been incorporating that a lot back in the independent world. A lot of shops, swapnostics, I heard that term thrown around on a few podcasts, and I kind of chuckled about that, and that is a real thing. Where I'm at now, they're really receptive to, my ideas, and actually, the technicians come up and ask me, show them different things. Like I've showed them, how to scope like a, digital wheel speed sensor versus like an analog one, different signals you're going to look at, and just, it kind of opens their eyes a little bit and helps them go down the right path, with vehicles. And, yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy experience, from the dealer, independent and corporate side of things. I know a little about a lot and a lot about a little. So, I mean, kind of well-rounded, I guess I'd like to describe myself. So.
Oh, that's really, that's cool. Cause, I came up solely in the independent world. I was at a Toyota dealership actually for about 6 months when I was still in school. I was still in tech school, and I just did oil changes there at this Toyota dealership. And at the time, that was kind of like the big leagues, was going to the dealership. But when I got in there, I was like, oh, all you want me to do is oil change, run it through the car wash, oil change, run it through the car wash. And I talked to some of the other guys that were working at the shop, and they had been doing that for 2 or 3 years and waiting to moved up to the point where they could do coolant flushes and brakes. And I was like, I want to do that stuff now. And then I want to be doing engines in a year or two, or, something more challenging, more exciting. And so that's what led me to the independent world. Was I was impatient and I didn't want to, climb the totem pole, if you will. I just wanted all the big stuff right now. And so I left the dealership after about 6 months, and I went independent, and that was my whole technician career. So it's interesting to see how, people take different paths through the industry to get where they're at.
No, and that's exactly it too, Sean. When I first came up to Fargo, I was young, right? And, and Fargo was honestly only not that far from where I grew up, a little over an hour. But when I first got up here in Fargo, this has been like 06 and 07, starting at the dealer, I kind of thought that was like the pinnacle. There wasn't much technician turnover then, so when I finally got to the shop, I kind of got thrown into the wolves per se. So it was a learning curve quick, and it's like, all right, what are the other guys doing? Trying to study pattern failures to kind of make ours, because, they did give you like a 60-hour guarantee when I started, years ago now. But I mean, that really, once you start growing and get a family, that really doesn't, cut the cheese per se, and it's, so yeah, that was kind of, from my experience, like the pinnacle, being a dealer tech. But, recently now I see, especially at the bigger ones, kind of like a very high turnover rate. And I kind of start asking to them, it all comes back to the same thing, trying to beat the warranty times and this and that, and the 2/10, the 3/10, and them having to write, and document, a story that takes longer than the repair, and, and they're not really getting compensated for it. And then when I was a field service engineer, there are some dealers being proactive about, taking care of their technicians, compensating them, getting them to training and stuff like that. But then just like any other independent shop too, there are some dealers that I was involved with that really didn't want to do any training, well, we're never going to deal with that, and I've heard that too. And I tried to get their attitudes changed, because I'm like, whether you like it or not, we said the same thing about carburetors years ago. Technology eventually has a way of being forced on us, whether we like it or not. You got to kind of learn to adapt or bow out,
Exactly. that car is going to be in your bay at some point or another, whether you like it or not. And then are you just going to send it to the dealer or say, I can't fix it, or are you going to figure it out?
Right. And then there's a lot of amazing dealers out there, but then there's a lot of vehicles too. I can kind of briefly share, and it was from a small dealer, I don't know where, but I was back in the independent world here. And it was like a 2018 Equinox. And for whatever reason, they had it at a small dealer. Our driver window wouldn't roll down. So they got to the conclusion they put a window motor in it. And I don't know the whole story, so I'm not going to throw any shop names or nothing out there. But it ended up in my bay, and they're like, and the customer was mad because this shop dealership put a window motor in it, and the window still did not work, and they sent him down the road and still made him pay for the window motor. And I'm like, what? Yeah. So I don't know if they had another shop diagnose it, and that dealer put a window motor in there, and the customer just said, put this in, I already know what's wrong. Anyway, long story short, it ends up in my bay. And I'm like, okay. well, let's get the scan tool plugged in. Let's look at inputs. The BCM seeing the switch input. I'm like, okay. Fortunately, the panels come off easy on here, and there is a power and ground, and they both load tested fine with the bulb. And I'm like, okay, well, what a lot of people don't realize, is all these window motors and modules and stuff on vehicles nowadays are essentially a little module itself. So this window motor is on the LIN bus. So I got the U scope out, and the green wire, I'm probably wrong, but I believe it was pin 6 at the window motor connector. I back probed in there, and key on, I had just a solid 12 volts. I'm like, okay, that's weird. That's normally when the module's in sleep mode, and then if the BCM sends the wake up signal out, then it pulls it to ground or to 0 volts, and then they start communicating. So I'm like, well, that's weird. So I know this window motor's good. I know I have power and ground. It's at its 12 volts, but it's not being told to wake up. Well, long story short, you chase it up a little ways, and there's a broken wire in the door. So if we restore that little small LIN bus wire and repair that wire, everything's happy. It probably didn't need the window motor and then the switch and everything else. And I had about an hour and a half, 2 hours into it, just covering my bases, because I'm like, oh, this customer's not really happy already. They had a switch and then a motor, and we're still here. And I'm like, well, that little LIN bus wire is pretty important now on these newer vehicles. So I was kind of happy to find that for them.
It's really funny. Oh, I don't know if funny is the word, but it's interesting to see how easily something like a LIN bus can defeat a lot of technicians that are out there that, like you mentioned, haven't taken the time to do any training in the last 10, 20 years, right? And they're very good at what they do as far as repairing vehicles and hanging parts and being efficient at their job and making a lot of money and having a busy shop, like all that stuff they're very good at. But that one little broken wire in a door for the LIN bus, I just had one on an F250 not that long ago. It was a relatively new one, but the harness was kind of out of place, and the wire that happened to got cut on a metal part of the door was the LIN bus for the door switch. And so, none of the functions work. And they replaced 3-4 different components, door switch and window motor and this and that.
Right.
And nothing's making a difference, right? But I mean, I scan it and there's a communication code, right? Can't talk to blank module or whatever. And if you've done the training and if you take the time to understand these systems, that one is a really, really easy problem. But for somebody who decides, for whatever reason, right? I'm really not trying to judge anybody out there, because everybody's got a different, thing going on in their life, and their shop is different, and, they might be busy beyond belief. But when you don't do that stuff, man, just something simple like that can beat you up. And I guess I don't want to be in that position, right?
Well, I've been there a lot. I don't want to get
beat up by a stupid LIN bus. Yeah, I have been there, but I'd rather not go back or go back as little as possible, I guess.
And that's, with that same one too, I can rewind a little bit. I did do a scan on there too, and there was a LIN bus code, but it was really nothing related to the driver door or the window, but that got my brain turning. I'm like, LIN bus. Okay, well then I pull up the data communication schematics, hit the LIN bus. I'm like, well, let's see what's all on this LIN bus. And I'm like, Then the lights started coming on. I'm like, we need to focus over here. Driver window motor on the LIN bus. And then, and then you end up finding it, and it's nothing against other technicians either, especially at the dealer when you're make specific. I noticed, you do get used to pattern failures, churning out these warranty jobs, making your paycheck, right? You get what I like to call like tunnel vision. So when you get a vehicle in, they're a slew of U codes, and they're mad because they, have an engine job or, a set of lifters or something outside they want to get slammed in and make a check. And they know they're going to make 2/10, 5/10 because they don't want to take the time to write a story, which I get too, but that's the only way they're going to get paid. So they kind of throw their hands up and push it off. Then it gets forgotten about, and then customers get mad, and then we know how that all goes. So.
Yep. That's that thing is the flat rate pay scale, or the productivity pay scale, really only works well for parts hanging because that's in your mind. Like, I know that set of forward ball joints. I've done it, X amount of times. I know exactly how long it's going to take me. I know what tools I need. I know what it's going to entail. And I can count on that to be part of my check for this week. But that U code is a complete mystery as to what I'm going to run into and what I'm going to find and what tools I'm going to need and how long it's going to take me. And so to me, as a person who wants a good paycheck at the end of the week, why would I take the mystery one that could end up paying me less and be harder work than the thing that I know is going to pay me this much? So you can't blame so many people for, going that route. It's like, I want to hang parts, or, I want to move on past this diagnostic. And so that's a lot to say to really get to the point of, and a lot of people have said this too, is diagnostics should be paid differently to the technician than the traditional flat rate scale, in my opinion. Like, whether it be salary or some other type of incentive bonus, I think that would really, really make a difference in guys and girls wanting to figure this stuff out and seek out the education and the tooling in order to figure this stuff out, rather than just, hey, it's 1.2 to figure out this communication issue. Good luck.
No, and you're absolutely right. And I can get, I can play devil's advocate and play both sides of it. I've been fortunate enough the past, with General Motors and then my, independent world, I've been fortunate enough to be on, a very good salary, which does help. In the dealership side of it, I think there's room to improve, but some of these dealerships, there's a lot of technicians there, right? So what is the smoking gun, the right answer when you have all these techs? Okay, let's say you put them all on this salary now, but then you get some techs that just aren't passionate about the industry. And they're like, oh, cool, I got this,
Sure.
What am I going to do to skate by, and get this check? And then I'll get a talking to that maybe I'm not producing. And then they'll bump it up a little bit for a week or two, because service managers, if you got 20 techs, somebody's going to slip through the cracks, it can be abused. Not going to sit here and try to tell people I know the right or wrong answer. I guess I know what works and what doesn't, but the big key component to that is being passionate about what you do. That kind of brings me back to my pinnacle of my career. And, people have different opinions on ASCs, and sometimes I do as well. But just achieving them is another way of showing just how passionate you are about, your career. That was one thing I was really fortunate about being an FSC. One thing about General Motors, they require their field service engineers to achieve ASC world-class status as one of their metrics, which I think is fantastic. I can't speak for other manufacturers, but it's a good third-party certification. Say, hey, they're competent in what they're talking about in case you were ever, questioned or something like that, like litigation or whatever. If there's something wrong with the car and, somebody brings their experts and then bring your expert. I know there's some manufacturers that only require the manufacturer required training and not ASCs. So that's my little soapbox about that. I do believe there is a place for ASC. And I technically achieved world class last year. Didn't get acknowledged for it because I had one expired in a calendar year that was recerted all last year. But yeah, so it's like I was waiting for my plaque this year. And I emailed Julie White, to the ASC coordinator. I'm like, what's going on here? And she's like, well, you didn't recert one in time. It was like expired for a month or two, and then I recerted it. And I'm like, we won't go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, so I hung my head on there. I was all excited, because it's a lot. I never really did body work, but I can understand panels and, paint and all that. And then just to do all the medium duty too to go with it. I don't know if you guys are you familiar with ASC World Class, Sean?
Well, I was just about to ask you about that, as I've heard of it, but I honestly don't know everything that's required in order to achieve that status. So, fill me in. What would someone need to do as far as the certifications go to get that?
So to be world class, as far as it goes in the automotive world, it basically I have a few more extra than I think you actually need, but you basically need to be your A1 through A8s, your normal, automotive master tech, your B2, B3, B4, and B5, which is painting, refinishing, non-structural analysis and repair, structural analysis, and then the mechanical and electrical components. You do need your L1 and your L2, and then you need your T1 through T8, which would be medium duty. I do also have the L3 and my A9, and I also have X1 I took a while ago just to get the undercar specialist tag, but it's basically 22 tests, I think. And I don't know, the reason why they didn't include diesel or hybrid, I do not know. I think because maybe some shops never see hybrid, so they kind of make it a world-class certification where not everybody's going to be working on hybrids. It's not as mainstream as, internal combustion engines. But basically it involves being master status in 3 categories, with your L1 and your L2 and advanced level specialties, and make sure they're all current for the whole year. Don't let one lapse. And then, then the following calendar year, they'll send you like a plaque. You get recognized in automotive. I actually can pull it up here while we're talking about, because I think it's actually really cool. And approximately only 50 technicians achieve this status a year, out of the approximately 200 or 250,000 ASC certified technicians. But I actually have it pulled up right now. 22 specialty areas. And then only approximately 2,000 technicians since World Class started in 1986 have achieved it. So out of the 750, 800,000 technicians, 200 to 250,000 are ASC certified. Excuse me. And then only about 2,000 since this started have actually achieved it, which 86, I was born in 86, so 37 years. And about 50, we'll call it 50, just nice even number a year usually achieve it. Yeah, it's a great experience. That's really cool. Once I actually get it here, they say you get a special certificate signed by the president of ASC and Auto Care Association, embroidered patch, and a personalized plaque and medallion kit, and then a promotion in auto care and ASC communications to thousands of industry professionals.
Yeah, the ASE stuff, I've always done that. I've never done the world class level. That actually is something pretty cool to shoot for. But as soon as I was done tech school, I went out and I got my, master certification, and I felt weird about it at first because I was 19 years old and I had the master certified automotive technician, and I didn't feel like I was a master, and I definitely wasn't. I still am not, but I definitely didn't feel like it at 19. But I resonate with what you're saying of, I felt that it would show to my potential employers or my current employer, my dedication to the industry and to bettering myself and learning everything I can. Like, if nothing else, that's what I felt like the certifications and the patch showed people within the industry. And it's good to the customers too, right?
100%
got there, but
and that's it on that too. Just because you have the tests obviously doesn't mean you can fix, the car, obviously. And
right.
And I didn't get all mine right away. Honestly, I was deathly scared of them. I think I finally became master certified maybe in my late 20s after I had some experience under me, and then decided to tackle the L's, L1, L2, L3, and I thought that was awesome. And then now there's an L4 out, and I'm like, damn it. So now I got to brush up on ADAS and then maybe try to get that one if I'm feeling ambitious here one day. So
I'll tell you what, on the ADAS test, the L4, if you are efficient at utilizing service information, you can pass that test, and you have a general knowledge of ADAS. You should definitely have a general knowledge, but I'll admit this, and I think I've said it on the podcast before. I went and I passed the L4, prior to ever doing a real world ADAS calibration. And that's not to talk down to the test. I think the test was extremely well written and well put together and very good at assessing your knowledge on the subject, but they give you really good composite vehicle along with the test. And a lot of it comes down to is how well can you read and assess the information that's available to you in order to get to the end goal. And I feel as though from talking to some people that actually help make the test is that that's part of the idea, especially with ADAS. It's like, are you reading the instructions? Number one, are you interpreting the instructions? Or are you utilizing what you're reading when you're doing it? And I felt that during the test. I was like, oh, they're really playing off of this key piece of service information in order to answer this question. And they give you the composite vehicle. And so that was fantastic. So I would say you should, brush up on your ADAS stuff and go take it, and you'll do just fine.
I think I'm going to have to. And then just too, as you're talking about ADAS, I mean, you touched on a very, very important topic here in the automotive world nowadays. Everybody has what is master, and I heard it on another podcast, and I believe you were talking about it as well too with Fonslow one time. But thinking about it, look at even in the past 10 years, just how vehicles have changed, right? We have to be able to you can't memorize all this stuff. There's no way. I mean, I got a bunch of useless knowledge and movie comments up in my head. But that's what you said, service information. But you'd be surprised how many technicians are great at, take your pick, replacing head gaskets, doing whatever, base mechanical stuff. But when it comes, as soon as a trouble code's stored, they don't know what to do. Like, I have this trouble code. What do I do? I'm like, well, did you even type it into the database? What's the code telling you? What's the setting criteria? What's the description and operation of the system? And then you pull up a schematic and they just get like deer in headlights and they're lost and like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, and it's hard to do because it's not their fault. It's the fault of, maybe lack of training or shops not putting emphasis on aftermarket training. And I try to hit everyone I can. I'm always learning. I don't know everything, and I'll never claim I do, but I know enough to be really dangerous in a lot of areas. But I didn't get that way overnight. Countless miles driving with my field service engineering career, numerous podcasts, almost every one of yours. And then, but I mean, you're putting in work even after work and you don't realize it. And being able to read and comprehend and navigate service information, like you just said, for that L4, I mean, that to be a master, I think that is a very important criteria. You need to be able to be like, hey, I've never worked with this system before, but we have a trouble code. I have service information. I have adequate schematics. Let's get after it. Let's figure this out. And just a lot of people, it doesn't work like that before. It's out of their comfort zone, and then they just kind of get the deer in the headlight look and kind of shut down. So,
I have 100% been the deer in the headlights plenty of times. But when I feel that for whatever reason, whatever area of the automotive industry that I feel completely inept at, I try to ask myself, okay, well, should I be proficient in this area or this topic or this car or whatever? And if so, what would I need to do in order to achieve that? And then, weigh my options. Okay, I'm going to go to training. I'm going to learn this thing, whatever it is. And there's a few areas where I'm like, nah, that doesn't really apply to me. And that's kind of been my attitude on diesels over the year. I'm just like, I don't really want to be a diesel tech. Carburetors were that way for me. I'm like, yeah, I can rebuild one, but I don't want to be a carburetor diagnostic guy. So I never put in the effort on certain things. I've weighed my options, but hybrids, for instance, and ADAS stuff, for instance, and all that, I'm like, okay, this is something that I feel that is going to be very crucial to me going forward. Okay, where can I go for training? How can I learn this stuff? And that's where it is on you a lot of times as a technician. And hopefully your employer is offering some training options for you, but you kind of have to take the initiative in order to improve yourself. and stay relevant in this field. But yeah, there should be a class on comprehending and navigating service information. I think
100%.
that's a skill it's not, it's weird because it's not a real tangible thing. It's hard to even explain like what that quality or that ability is, but man, is it so important. If somebody could create a class to help someone at least get their head wrapped around what it is and how you get there, that would be a really, really cool thing. So
I tried thinking about that too.
Get on that, Chris. Let's make it class.
Right. I think that's a fantastic idea. I actually thought about that before, but then the squirrel or the ADD in my brain goes another direction. I'm like, I don't know how I could teach this without like, here, come to my class and just watch me play around. Like I'll pick a couple vehicles and give out random scenarios, and then they'll be like, boy, I just wasted my time. Yeah. You know, not even pay attention, and I'll lose them the first 5 seconds. Everybody's got their own way to navigate it. And it's, I've been fortunate enough. I've used All Data, Mitchell, Identifix, GMSI, even had a brief access to Ford, but I haven't looked at Ford service information for a long time. But normally between Mitchell and Identifix or Direct Hit, Solaris, whatever they want to call themselves nowadays, they actually really well with, for the most part, service information. I mean, even the manufacturers get their service information, you know, not wrong, we'll call it inaccurate sometimes, and you know, that's kind of where service bulletins and stuff like that come in to correct some of that stuff. Because you got to understand too, I mean, everybody's human, right? And there's people proofreading these before they're published. There's people that are actually creating these schematics, and you know, it's easy. Especially like the newer GM vehicles of the Global B architecture. You know, there's 6 or 7 different CAN systems in any one of these vehicles, and you know, that's a lot of, you know, network topology to map out. You know, so it could be easy to get a circuit or you know, a wire on the wrong page or going to the wrong pin. I mean, that's one big thing I want to stress on service information to technicians. You know, get familiar with connector end views and don't stick a micro 60 pin fit adapter in a micro 50 hole and cause a problem. I may have ran into that a few times. So, but that's just, you know, and I can't believe it, you know, especially in our area, Sean, you know, some of the issues we're probably going to see, like we've already seen with the smaller these pins get, it's very important for, you know, pin tension and cleanliness, you know, and making sure fender liners and panels are on vehicles and these connectors are sealed, because it won't take much to get some micro fretting on these, you know, small terminals and cause a lot of issues. And then sometimes unplugging it and plugging it back in, you've just, the problem went away, and then you don't know if you fixed it or not. So.
Yeah, that's the worst. You are just trying to test something and then you fix the problem, but you're not sure how you fixed the problem. Right. That is not a fun situation to be in. You're like, well, it's fixed, but I don't know what caused it. Yeah, going back to the service info thing, I think the search feature has really, really come a long way in the last couple of decades. And I know that's a long period of time, but I'm thinking back to when I first started and, you know, what was available for service information. And it might be a good thing to learn how to navigate and find everything within service info. But there's so much and there's so many vehicles, that little search bar, whether it be All Data or Identifix or whatever you're using, that is so helpful to, you know, really streamline things and get to where you want to be within the information. And some I think do it better than others, but where I kind of see this going in the next decade is, I don't know if you've played around all with any of the AI stuff, the language models that have been out, like ChatGPT. I've been doing a lot with that, and
I actually just re-listened to you and Fonslow talking about that, and I think it was on his podcast in maybe January or February, but I just recently listened to that one again, and you know, this stuff's kind of scary if you think about it that way, but I mean, yeah.
Oh, it is.
You know, I mean,
I feel as though these companies that have the service information if they're not already, they're going to start integrating this within their systems, within their platforms, where you'll have basically a type of chatbot that has access to all of the service information, all of their archives, and so that you're able to ask it questions and have it generate things for you. Not even just looking up, like you could look up, that's a search bar, but say, hey, this is the code I have. These are the symptoms that I have. Can you generate a test plan for me? And just with the stuff that I've played around with like ChatGPT, which doesn't have access to, Identifix or factory service information, it's pretty impressive what it can do if you ask it the right questions. And I wouldn't be surprised at all, again, if that starts being integrated within the service information. And that's gonna be a big game changer. I don't even really know what it would look like and how it's going to affect what we do. But I'm really curious to see how the next decade looks for that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's definitely it's just like all technology. It'd be great if it worked, but in our situation, kind of hope that doesn't work. I'm like, you put all this work into to get, you know what I mean, to get kind of fluent in what you do, and then it's like, all right, we don't need you anymore to make money. We're just going to type it into this, and then we can, hire somebody else that can just carry out the repair. And I'm like, oh, great. I did all these years of training for nothing. Now I'm just sitting here and talking about the old days, sipping coffee on the porch, But yeah, that is crazy. If you think about it, though, there is kind of some mild versions of AIs in cars. We got the bright drop, and we got the self-driving vehicles, the autonomous ones being tried out in certain areas, and then Super Cruise on a lot of the GM products. I mean, that's a really cool and crazy feature. But a lot of that too, some of these customers aren't getting educated, on them right from the dealer. Just a quick little story on the Super Cruise. So I went out on a call once. I was looking at a Super Cruise, and the customer's like, every time I go this way on the interstate, it will say, cruise disabled, grab the wheel, and then eventually it'll make you start braking. And they're like, something's wrong with it. Never done this before. They're adamant, and the dealership's frustrated with it. They took it down the interstate, right? And like never does it for us. I don't know, customers this or that or whatever. And if you're familiar with Fargo, I-29 runs north and south through the city, and then we have I-94 that runs, east and west through the city that goes down to Minneapolis and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So I get there, I talk to the service manager. I'm like, all right, a brand new vehicle, they know the owner. It's one of them high profile things, so you got to bend over backwards and take care of them. So I'm like, well, let's start from square one. All right, what's going on? He's like, well, we drive it, we can't get it to duplicate. We don't know what's going on. There's no trouble codes, nothing like this. And I'm like, okay. So we go for a ride. I'm like, I have the technician drive. I'm like, I want you to drive, and let me, had my laptop plugged in, just monitoring weird inputs or weird, maybe disabling criteria if anything popped up randomly. And so we're driving, and I'm like, well, which way do you take? He's like, we always go north. I'm like, all right, well, let's go north. There's a exit 5 miles north of town. We'll turn around and come back and try it. And I'm like, so this is where you took it for every test drive? He's like, yeah, we took it west too. And I'm like, hey, just humor me here. Let's go south. So we go south out of Fargo, and we get by 32nd Avenue and 52nd Avenue, and then it kind of, the city's over and keeps going. We get up to safe speeds, engage Super Cruise. So you got to keep your head forward. There's like infrared too that can tell if your face isn't watching the road, and it'll disable or remind you too. So I'm like, well, let's make sure we're not going to give it any other disable reasons. Just drive like you're the customer, whatever. And we're approaching construction, and I'm like, don't do anything, leave it go for now. And we're getting into construction, and the cones are starting, and it's slowing down. It recognizes construction zone, and about a half mile or a mile ahead, they have us there. There's like a merge set up to where you go in the northbound lane, going south, because they're working on the southbound lane. And then right then the red lights came on. It said stop, Super Cruise disabled. Grab the wheel immediately. It braked and kind of like violently, kind of wanted you to turn. And I'm like, all right, well, it did it there. That's completely normal. It recognized there's a construction zone, right? And so it's like, hey, we don't know what's going on because these systems operate off LiDAR and updating in Google Maps. So anytime there's construction on some of these, the Google Maps may not be updated for another, 6 months or a year till the project is complete, right? So essentially, at that time, your Super Cruise is not going to work in that section of road, and that's an education deal that, gets lost in translation when people buy their new vehicles. They're just so quick to sign on the dotted line and drive their fancy new vehicle that can press a button and drive them anywhere and they don't have to touch the wheel. Well, there's geological factors that play into it. Not everything's perfect and updating in real time. They try to as quick as they can, but until that Google Maps or LiDAR vehicle drives down the road in its finished state and maps it out, it's not going to be updated till the next map update. And that's for safety reasons. Otherwise, your vehicle would just drive you off the road, if something happened, So education too with these newer vehicles, I think, is lacking, as far, it could be better. We'll put it that way, in the sales department. But I don't know. There's never going to be a 100% way to fix that, but just little stuff I observed, and I thought that was interesting. I'm like, no, it's working as designed. Ask the customer if they'd rather be sitting in a ditch, but I thought that was interesting, and you would never duplicate it if you went west or north. There was no construction going on then, but for the heck of it, I'm like, well, let's try going south, and because they tried test driving it north, and I'm like, where's the customer taking it? Well, they go down to Hankinson quite a bit, there's a casino and a restaurant down there. I'm like, well, let's try test driving it south then. And then sure as hell, we find that, in the construction zone, it was aware of it, but it didn't know which way the road was essentially going to go. So then eventually it's like, hey, grab the wheel now. We're shutting it down. And then long story short, the Super Cruise won't work again until you power cycle the vehicle, because it's in that safety mode.
Oh.
But so that was kind of neat.
Well, see, that's the thing with these systems. I think back to, again, starting out early in the industry for me, and I mean, people don't know how to use the basic features on their car. Like, we'd have, older people come in and they wouldn't press the AC button and their AC doesn't work, right? And like, just really, really, really simple stuff. They just don't know the basic features of their car. And now all of a sudden we've integrated these systems like that are, damn near driving the car themselves. And yes, the customer needs some education. And for second, third owners of these vehicles, as time progresses, that's going to be a really interesting thing when, you've never driven a car with any type of ADAS system. And then, 10 years down the road, you get into a 2018 for the first time and you have absolutely no clue how any of this stuff works. Yeah, there's almost going to have to be like a different section of driver's education for these things for people. And to your point about really getting the customers' perspective and information on their problem too. I just had Brittany on recently and she was bringing up that exact same thing. Is like, how exactly is that car being driven by the customer in order to duplicate this problem? Well, maybe you should go do that same thing, and or even just bring them with you. Like, here, show me what you're doing. And I've done that before when I couldn't duplicate something. And more than once, it's been the customer drives the vehicle like a complete maniac. And that's how they get it to make a noise or do what it's doing. And me as technician who's trying to be respectful of your car is driving it very politely and non-aggressively. Right. And you're out there just all the way to the floor, taking corners, like, oh, hear that clunk as we're doing 30 around a corner.
Yeah, your like, car left the ground and landed again. Yeah, maybe drive the speed limit. Everybody's driving style is just so different. So, I mean, sometime, and then just the stories from the customer to the service advisor to the technician, a lot of stuff gets lost in translation. So a lot of times there's no way around it. You just got to say, hey, I need to talk to Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer, and what's going on here, or even go for a ride with them. Everybody lives in a different neighborhood, different set of driving conditions. And that's one thing too, that's kind of, with all this ADAS, right, and all these different modules we're incorporating into vehicles, some of them, people, I'm sure you've seen this a lot. Oh, it doesn't work. Well, I'm not going to fix it. It costs too much money. Well, some of these you might be forced to fix with all the different communication networks that some of these modules are incorporated into and how the vehicle operates by talking to all of them. Like a low speed GM LAN issue, like a rear bumper harness that gets melted on the exhaust for the side detection modules. That'll bring the low speed down, and you won't even be able to power up or start the vehicle properly. And you're kind of forced to, on that you might be able to get away with unplugging it, but then you're opening up another can of worms, leaving connectors exposed, and I'm kind of curious to see how the next 10 years are going to go with some of these vehicles that have it now, and the fact that you really can't, certain systems you're not going to be able to disable. Are we just going to crush them because people can't afford to fix them, or what are we going to do with them? But it'll be kind of curious to see. But
yeah, that is, not only the functionality, but the cost of maintaining these systems. And, of course, it's like everything else. Eventually, the cost of things comes down. But the way I think about it is just the availability of the components, and, how long are they going to make, all of these different radar units and cameras and stuff like that for vehicles to be available, or how many of them are going to become discontinued, right? And you can't get a Subaru EyeSight module 15 years from now. It doesn't exist. And so they're all scrambling for the used ones. And then, how many vehicles become really expensive to repair, undrivable because of the cost of maintaining these systems? And maybe that won't be an issue, all right. If there's a need, there's probably going to be a solution in today's world, but
that's just it now too. What we recently had a vehicle in the shop. It was 2012 Ford Taurus with just the 3.5, the natural aspirated one. It had the shorted coil, misfire, and it took a driver out in the PCM. And I'm like, well, yeah, that definitely smells like somebody let the smoke out of it. So we got to replace that, right? Excuse me. Well, Ford, it's not available anymore. So we tried to go an aftermarket route, and we got a Remand one. It was kind of spendy too. And I won't name any Remand companies, but we got it in there. I programmed it. We use FDJS and DrewTech, and it works really well. And then I did the whole PATS function. I'm like, great, awesome. We got lucky with the Remand. It's starting, it's operating fine. Second key cycle, check engine light comes on. I'm like, what the heck? No. And it was like a P0453 fuel tank pressure low input, or signal low. And I'm like, well, that wasn't in there before. And I'm like, well, maybe it didn't run a monitor because the misfire was so, just kind of thinking out of the box. And I'm like, all right, well, let's clear it. Maybe it was and then came right back. And this time I watched it on the key cycles. And I'm like, well, what the heck, So I'm like, I was just kind of brainstorming. I'm like, it wasn't here before, but I want to give some of these, Remands and aftermarket a little more faith, because sometimes you got to use them. So I'm like, well, I'm not just going to condemn this part right away. I'm going to go, spend more time than I should, but actually prove something to myself. And if you remove the rear seat on the passenger side, you can actually get at the access cover. And the fuel tank pressure sensor is actually in a...
Oh, nice.
It's in a, the corrugated plastic tube, like evap lines are on this one, right? So I'm like, well, I'm going to unplug it and look at it, see if my code changes maybe. Maybe the sensor is shorted. Code never changed. It stuck with that one. And I'm like, well, that's really weird. And at that point, I should have just stopped and said, hey, this one's bad. But I went and swapped pins around. I'm like, maybe when they assembled this PCM, they put the low reference in the signal spot and whatever. I was going down a rabbit hole. But I'm like, I'm right here. It's not going to be that hard for me to take two pins out, swap around, try it again. Didn't change. And I'm like, there's something up with this Remand. We got to find a different one. Well, and there wasn't really a viable Remand option again. So we called around to one of our trusted salvage yards in town. And they gave us a number for another salvage yard. I forgot where it was in the country, but they said, yeah, we have one. We'll ship it to you $80 plus freight. I'm like, all right, it's a Ford one, part number's matched. Ford's pretty forgiving as long as you have the right part number. Program it. Long story short, everything's fine. My 453 didn't come back. And I'm like, I wasted a half hour, 45 minutes screwing around, but I wanted to prove it to myself, but that's one thing I really would like to get into, down to like board level stuff someday when time allows. But with young kids and stuff, I don't have a lot of free time, but I think that would be kind of neat to get into, listening to you and Tommy on podcasts sometimes.
Yeah, it's so neat to get into that. It's so interesting and enveloping. The problem that I have with it is exactly that, is like each individual module can become its own monster, and you're learning something completely new, and try to fix a certain issue with a certain module. And the time is where it's been a limiting factor for me. It's like I actually have a cabinet full of modules at home right now, all with things I know what's wrong with them and that I would love to figure out how to fix, but I don't know when I'll get to it, right? I'm going to have to take like a sabbatical or something in order to sort through those things and figure it out. So
take vacation
it's
and
a hobby for down the road. Yeah, I don't think my girlfriend would like that too much. So.
I'm taking vacation to learn a new trade here, dear. No, and that's just it too. I mean, I'd really love to, but yeah, like you said, there's never enough hours in the day and stuff for stuff like that. I mean, then you start sacrificing your work home life balance stuff, and I guess you got to prioritize. But someday I told myself I'm at least going to attempt it. But I don't know. I do have the old PCM from this Ford, but it's kind of cooked, so I'm assuming the board might be burnt too. But I don't know. I guess I'd have to talk to somebody that does it more to see maybe if there's any resurrecting it at all or not.
Yeah, it all depends on what component failed and did it cause damage to other components on the board. And yeah, when you crack them open and you get that smell, you're like, okay, something happened here. we've got some damage, and usually in that case you have something visual of a component that shorted out. And again, all depends on how catastrophic the damage was, right? Was it just a resistor or a driver that burnt out, or did a section of the board burn up? And then that determines whether you can fix it or not. And then also your skills with soldering and dealing with the small components and stuff like that. It's a whole nother skill set. It's a whole nother world. I think almost a whole nother profession that we're just sort of dabbling in on our side. And some guys are really, really good at it. And I give all the credit in the world to those people, because I feel like I just kind of dabble in that side. And
right.
It definitely helps. It's made me some money. It's gotten me out of some pinches, for sure. And it's interesting. I could probably sit around most days and just do module work, and I would be pretty happy. Right. It's very interesting.
Kind of elaborating on, happy work for us nowadays. I could honestly, I'll still do it. It's gravy money for the shop, whatever. But I really hate doing ball joints and brakes. When it comes in, I'm like, people are like, oh, I'd do that all day. And I'm like, here, have it. I don't want it. Let me see what's going on with that check engine light. Multiple indicators on the dash. Send that one my way, please. It's it. But it's just what you prefer on, people in their comfort zones. And I used to be like that too. I'm like, no, give me the struts, give me the ball joints, give me the brakes. The older I get, I could care less if I ever did another brake job again, honestly. I'd like to focus my ambitions and talent elsewhere,
What is your role within the shop that you're at right now?
I would have to call it head technician, estimate, builder, troubleshoot. Maybe just the jack of everything kind of. It's not really a technician is my title, but the owner trusts me to actually talk to his customers. I build a lot of my own repair orders and get a lot of my own parts coming in. I'm still on average, 120%, on an 8-hour day efficient. There's some days you just kill it, you knock it out of the park, 16 hours, whatever. There's some days you get 6. It averages out still, I still can produce 10, 12 hours on average in a 8-hour workday, which is what I'm kind of proud of, because, you can start feeling your body, kind of creep up on you, especially with a couple-year break on the FSC side, where you see problems and you see them till they're fixed, but you're not the one tearing it apart. You kind of get what I'm saying. When I actually have to throw my body back into it again, I'm not going to lie, the first month or so, I'm like, oh, shit, I forgot I had that spot on my body. And it's like, oh, here, back again. We got you sucked back in. The automotive world, it's, once you're in, you're in. But I know I enjoy it.
Dude, yeah, tell me about it.
But yeah, I had what the hell? Today I was doing one, just a normal side detection job, and that was one kind of thing I'd like to touch on too. For listeners, if you ever, get it, you're struggling, right, or you're, I don't know where to go with this, communication issue, this or that, and I'm sure a lot of people know that. We know it really well with the area we live in, but look at the high traffic areas. Look at bumpers, look at where harnesses are underneath the vehicle. People don't realize how much damage, not even from hitting stuff, but just from our seasons changing, road debris. Um, I can't count how many low speed issues on GMs that I've fixed by raising the vehicle on the hoist, looking at the rear bumper, or kick panels because somebody spilt something. I mean, and it's stuff that we probably all know and our listeners know too right now, but it's just something, whenever you get overwhelmed, you stop, take a step back, take a deep breath, and try to get out of that tunnel vision mode is what I like to call it that you're in, and and just walk away and come back at it, look at it fresh.
Yeah, the visual inspection, it's really obvious. Like, obviously you should look at the component that's failed or failing or reporting a code that's failed, but we don't always think about it first thing or at the right time. But man, yeah, how many problems have you solved just by looking at the damn thing? You're like, oh, okay. I had one today on a Chevy Camaro with a parking brake module that wasn't communicating. And like, before I did anything, I was just like, I'm going to just look underneath this thing and look at it. And there's a big green crusty on the power wire on the corner of the connector going to the module. I'm like, okay, I'm done,
Right.
And that visual inspection, not always, right? If it was just that, it would be really easy, but there's so much at the time. Just put some eyes on it and you'll find out what's going on. That's can't be overstated enough. And the only reason I say that is because sometimes I don't do that. I'm like, I'm tunnel visioning, right?
Yep.
And I'm going down the wrong path, or I'm researching like TSBs and I'm looking at wiring diagrams, which is all good stuff, but just take the time and look at it and you might find what you're looking for. And
that, coming back to, taking a step back and being aware, I have another little study I can share. It was a new pickup too, like a 2022 GMC, right? And there's like no miles on it. I probably shouldn't have left the dealer, because the customer knew there's a light on, but they, new shiny vehicle, they wanted to drive it. Okay. But long story short, there's a service message on the dash, service suspension system, right? And Global B vehicle, I believe there's about 6 different CAN networks on this particular vehicle. But there's no communication with the suspension module, and I think that was like an RPO, like ZL1. It doesn't really matter what the RPO is, but I had pulled up the right CAN schematic, right? So it's CAN 3, I believe, if I remember right. And all the modules, like as you like to say, are like daisy chained, right? And so I had no communication with the suspension module. A module's already been tried, right? I physically load tested the power and ground to this. It lit up my 194 test site just fine. I'm like starting to spin my wheels, right? I got a 3157. I'm like, well, let's see if there's something weird and we need a bigger load. Lit up the light nice and bright. At the time, I was just using, a 1-channel scope because I didn't want to pull out the dealer's Pico at the time. I'd second or third trip there, multiple modules have been thrown at it, right? And I'm just like, God, why can't I even talk to this damn thing? And, when you scope with a 1-channel, perfect CAN activity. You couldn't have asked for a better crystal clear waveform, right? So I'm like, all right, let's take a step back here. And I called one of my colleagues at the time. I'm like, help, walk me through this, right? I had tunnel vision. I'm like, I have activity on the data line, right? Powers and grounds, multiple modules are tried. I even took a module out of it was a rare condition where there was another vehicle with the same RPO, swapped it from that pickup to the one I was working on. Wouldn't communicate in the one I was working on, but it would communicate in the other one. And I had some other calls out, I thought, God, is it possible that there's some weird software glitch that this vehicle was uploaded with software that wasn't for this vehicle? Just kind of going down a rabbit hole. That all checked fine. There's no reason why this shouldn't communicate. And I'm like, all right, looked at the schematic. This suspension module happened to be at the end of, at the tail end of the network, this CAN 3, right? And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
it's not making sense, right? I have activity, 2 volts because I'm using a 1-channel scope at the time. And I'm like, all right, it's time to bust the Pico out, right? So I pull up the schematic. And before the suspension control module, it goes through the video processing control module, which is under the rear seat. And I'm like, I'm not ripping that seat out. The back seats in these vehicles are a pain in the butt. Take 2 hours there. I'll be standing here waiting for the technician to take it out. I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I look at the schematic, right? After that, there's a connector. We'll call it X204. But for whatever reason, it goes from the passenger rear seat to the bolt connector and the passenger front fender well. And then after that connector, it goes way back to the suspension controller above the spare tire. And I'm like, that just seems wrong. I'm like, whatever, okay, but I have an easy connector to access, right? So I looked at the schematic. I found CAN high and CAN low. I back probed each of them, separate channels, had 2 channels running, and then, a good ground, and fired the vehicle up. I'm like, God dang, that's perfect CAN communication, right? I'm like, looking. I'm like, blue going up, red going down, right? And then working with my colleague, we had the aha moment. He's like, well, what channel do you have A on and what channel do you have B on? And I told him, I'm like, yeah, and it looks fine. He's like, rewind a little bit. What did you just say? And I'm like, oh shit. CAN high that I thought I was plugged into at that connector was reading CAN low, and vice versa. CAN low was reading CAN high. And I'm like, a light bulb came on. At the video processing module, CAN high and CAN low on that CAN 3 network are going into the module correctly, but the pins coming out were flip-flopped. Okay. So it was trying to send a CAN high down a CAN low signal to the suspension module. That's why it was just completely dead and not being able to talk. Long story short, flipping 2 pins around, everything came back to life. Vehicle was fine down the road. And I'm like, that was like an aha moment with the scope for me. And, a lot of shop owners that I've talked to are, they're like, oh, scope, you don't need that fancy. Or they make a joke about it. And I'm like, listen, the newer, if you plan on staying in business for a while, these new vehicles coming down the pipe, we're going to need it more and more. And that one specifically, like I was getting my butt kicked on it. And it's all because I had tunnel vision. I wasn't going through the processes right at the time. And long story short, I should have had a 2-channel scope. Yeah. Anytime I'm scoping CAN now, if I have no communication, I'm like, wait a minute, did somehow a wire get flip-flopped here? And I had to laugh at myself.
Well, but I mean, that's something you really got to pay attention to, too. Like, you really got to be focused when you're doing those tests to know that, like, okay, I'm on CAN high, it should be going up. And that sounds simple enough, but man, when you're just in this and you're making all your checks, you're looking here, okay, yep, that looks good. Yep, that looks good. Okay, I'm moving on. I'm sure that's an easy one to miss. So the waveform wasn't distorted in any fashion, and I'm trying to think through this in my head, like if the module was still trying to produce a transmission, right, they'd be on the wrong side of the network, and so you'd think it'd be trying to pull down high and pull up low. You didn't see any of that on there, huh?
It was the most perfect CAN signal I could ever see. The only thing I didn't notice was
okay.
Well, I'm sure we've all done it, right? You have your scope hooked up. I'm like, well, there's nothing wrong there. You're just looking at your square waveforms, right? It was, I couldn't have pictured a better one. There was no noise, nothing. It was just perfect, but it was just in the wrong spot. And for whatever reason, well, I know the reason now is it doesn't like talking, it's like, it doesn't like going in and out, it's like high doesn't like going down the low channel. And that was a head scratcher. I had some people involved and I'm just like, well, what am I missing here? And then that just, slowing down sometimes, but this dealer was only an hour and a half away. So, it wasn't too bad to get to once in a while, but it's still frustrating because you try to gather all the data you can there. The technician was kind of frustrated and didn't want to put more time into it because you're not getting paid and, the whole story. But I just thought that was a unique one, and
Yeah. Do you think that was a man-made problem?
possibly, I mean, aftermarket parts, OE parts.
How else would they be flipped?
I think, harness manufacturer most likely, but that's something too. I like to say, just because you have a new part, what new stands for, never ever worked, right? So, it's a new part,
Right.
but if it's put together on a line just like anything, but I believe the CAN high and low wires were black and white or whatever at this module, we'll say, right? And the orientation on the back of the connector, if you can kind of visualize it, should have been black, white, black, white. And before we repaired it, it was black, white, white, black. So you could physically see it. The into the video processing module was correct. So basically that might be why there was no weird spike or bringing down it, because the terminating resistors were still doing what they were supposed to in the video processing module. And that was the thing. I couldn't communicate with the suspension module and the ABS, I believe, and the video processing module were the only two codes that the only two modules, that stored the code that they couldn't talk to that suspension module. So basically the continuity of the network was perfect, and all the other modules were tied in perfect, but it was just flip-flop coming out of the VPM, and that caused it to just didn't even recognize it.
Yeah, the resistor doesn't have a polarity,
right?
And so that won't change anything. But the transceiver in the target module, your suspension module, definitely does. I've experienced this myself trying to communicate with a module on the bench, and I get the CAN lines backwards, and you'll find out very quickly that doesn't work that way.
Right.
And, I should scope it the next time I do it wrong, just to see what it looks like. Like, does it look perfectly normal? Or, is the module still trying to produce some sort of message on there? That's an interesting thing, which I don't think I've ever seen that before, but that's cool. I like that.
Because, the resistance checks, because, the technician was doing all that too. And that's another thing to touch base on. I'm sure quite a few people know by now, but, you can't, any vehicle with the serial data gateway module, testing resistance and scoping at the data link connector is kind of a thing of the past. You got to find the least intrusive spot or connector, in line, and try to piggyback off that. But I don't know, because I think there's about 7 modules total on this CAN 3 network, maybe 8, and then the suspension controller happened to be at the tail end. So I don't know if there's enough other modules, but I shit you not, that's the square wave looked like a dream CAN signal, like too good to be true, just mirrored image, flip-flopped.
Dang. One of the things I found interesting about the CAN networks is when you have a module that's offline, it's not communicating for whatever reason, who is upset about it and who isn't on the rest of the network. And I've been surprised and interested on that a lot of the time, where I'll have what I would consider in my mind a pretty critical module that feeds information to a number of other modules on there, like an ABS module or a transmission control module, so something like that. And then there's only maybe like 1 or 2 modules that code for it. Now, maybe if you went out and drove the vehicle more, okay, but it's just like sometimes I'm like, wow, there's only 1 module upset about this other module not being on the network at all. It's not communicating at all, and I've only got 1 other module that sets a code. You would think that, everybody on the bus would be upset about an ABS module or a transmission module off there. And it's not always the case.
Nope.
Some cars it is, but it's not always the case. I found that pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's really crazy too. Some of the stuff, just stuff way over my head, as far as like the programming and software and hardware setups of some of these modules. Yeah, some modules could care less if one's talking to it or not, and some of them actually kind of surprised me. Like, okay, why do you care about this one, but the ABS controller,
right.
And it's just like I don't understand why. But in the world of infotainment, ADAS and everything else. If you kind of step back and look at it, you can kind of justify or reason it, I guess, but still sometimes it has me scratching my head. Gladly, I just need to worry about what's actually not communicating, eventually find it, and then get the customer fixed up and on the way, and then let somebody else worry about that. But
yeah. Ford, if you've ever looked into their service information under the description operation of the network, has a complete list. And I guess I don't know how 100% accurate it is, but it seems like a very complete list per vehicle of the broadcasting module, the message, and the receiving module for modules that exist on a CAN bus. And I have never seen anything else like that in any other like factory. Well, I'm using aftermarket service information, but I've never seen any other manufacturer do something like that. And it's only really helped me solve a problem a handful of times, but man, that's a nice resource to have, to just say like, oh, okay, the front interface display module outputs the message of you pressing a button to X modules. Those are the receiving modules. So in case you wanted to know, that info is there. And I would say for the majority of manufacturers, they ain't giving you that info. That's secret.
Right. No, and you're absolutely right. Some of it's proprietary just to the brand, but every manufacturer has their quirks too, and that's just kind of what's unique about everything. But eventually it all trickles out after it's been out for a while. Or somebody has a way to find it. We all know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, which does help. But yeah, network, I don't know. That's probably my favorite, honestly, like probably most of us. I love network issues, and I used to be deathly scared of them. Like I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I'm going to go do that brake job or that head gasket on the 3.5 or 3.9 in the Impalas, and then just kind of, just walk away from it. But I kind of wish I would have started earlier, but hindsight's 2020. I'm glad I'm not scared of it now, obviously, for the past many years. But yeah, it's unique, and I don't know. I'm not going to call it simple, because there's been a lot of years and different training to get to, like where you are, where I'm at, or where anybody's at in their diagnostic process. But the look on some people's eyes when you're like, holy crap, there were codes everywhere, and you had it for an hour, and it's fixed, and you used one heat shrink butt connector, and I'm like, yep, and it's like, taking a step back, I'm like, I'm in like you look like a hero to them, and they're like, how'd you do it? What the hell? They just scan a code, and then they see a bunch of them, and then, like we touched on before, they get kind of scared, and I don't know, and get tunnel vision, and just don't try, and that's hard to teach, how to, pick one out of a basket. One thing I can share is if you run into a slew of U codes on like, on like a global B system. And I'm just using that as an example because I'm most familiar with those on the GM. When you have 6 or 7 different CAN networks, sometimes there'll be a telltale when you're doing a complete code scan, like a U0073 CAN bus 1 off, or 0074 or 75. There'll usually be a little descriptor, that 00 and 70 whatever code, to kind of get you on the right network that's causing the problems. Because some of these modules have 3 different networks going through them, But if you can figure out what network out of the 6 CAN networks you're dealing with, that really clears the field a lot for you, right? You start getting into that funnel we like to talk about, focusing in one area. And then once I get in that funnel, I'm like, all right, it's CAN 3. What modules are on that CAN 3? Well, you have a side detection module, you have this, you have that, you have ABS module, fuel pump, I'm just throwing modules out there. Then that's where the visual inspection comes in. I'm going to go to these under vehicle modules first, look at the connectors, look how much gravel's built up around them, look how big they've grown with green crusties coming out of them, and kind of eliminate that first, the visual inspections. And then from there, it's like, okay, that's checking out good. Then you can start seeing, your powers, your grounds, your resistance checks, and stuff like that we've talked about a lot. But it's about picking your hill to stand on. And that's kind of what I use. I look for those as a descriptor. Usually it'll pop up and you at least know what network to kind of point towards.
Okay.
Front camera modules are a big one. The pin fits are so small in there, and them camera modules get so warm, over time. You'd be surprised at things that get screwed up when, a camera module takes down the bus it's on, the weird things it'll do sometimes. But they have micro 50 pins on the front camera modules, so you can about imagine the stress those and the heat those pins take. So.
Yeah, no kidding. And it's not like you can just go in and tighten up one of those pin fitments on something like that.
No, they're shot once they're shot. Yeah,
that's the tough part. Right. Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of that lately with the smaller pins. Once that connector has a little bit of damage or corrosion or expansion, it's like, let's replace the whole thing. You don't have much of an option at that point.
Yeah, there really isn't. Sometimes you can get terminated leads, but it's so hard to. I wouldn't even trust myself, I don't think, on a micro 50 to actually properly crimp it, male or female, and and guarantee the circuit integrity, because it's some of those ones I don't even think they'll even give you the option. It's got to be machine, or whatever machine they use and they're making the harnesses. It's got to be accurate and precise. But yeah, I mean, that's the world we're living in now. I mean, the pin fits are getting smaller, and that's another big thing too. Some technicians, you can always tell when, like an APP sensor or something comes in there. You pull a connector out and it's just slimy. It's like somebody tried to jam a bunch of dielectric grease in there. And I'm trying to educate, some technicians that live by that, dielectric grease doesn't promote conductivity. Small amounts can, kind of help clean your connections and make a connection better, but you're essentially trying to hydrolock the connector. If you had a pin fitment issue, it's going to be worse now after you jam that connector in there. And, and then trying to just, tell people that, but, they don't know, it's like the old saying goes, if a little does a lot, imagine what a lot will do. So apply a light dielectric grease, they're like, well, the spoonful's got to be better, right? Until we get it smashing out of that connector. And then I'm like, oh, you just created another problem. But yeah, that's a topic for another day, but it's just all the stuff, a guy sees like that. But, and that's, harness routings and stuff like that, just stuff that gets overlooked. I mean, I even got burnt by one on a Ford, now that I brought up APP, like most accelerator pedals, there's two APPs built in to kind of monitor each other, safety feature like most manufacturers use, so your vehicle doesn't take off on you. But had this weird Ford in, it was like a 15 or 16, with, I think they had a 5-liter in it. And it kept, I don't know the code descriptor off the top of my head, but it kept setting an APP too low. And I'm like, all right. And yes, and first it was intermittent, and we had put a accelerator pedal in it. After we checked, at the time we had our reference, low reference was good to ground. The signal wire wasn't shorted to ground or nothing. I'm like, well, let's try a pedal. I tried a pedal. Thing was gone for 2-3 weeks. Came back, same code. I'm like, what the hell? Well, when it sets, it goes into a default mode. Like a limp home mode where the accelerator pedal barely works. And then if you look on scan data, it shows APP2 at like 0.02 volts. And I'm like, that's weird. I try clearing it out. The voltage comes back to, at rest, I think APP2, and I'm probably wrong, but, one's at 1.1 and one's at like 3.8, right? And then the other one goes the other way and the other one goes up, as you press the pedal. And then as I did that, it glitched out, code set again. I'm like, what the hell? Circuit integrity and everything at the time, how I was testing good. I took the potentiometer from my ES Wave kit, 3 pins, right? I'm like, well, I can physically put 3 pins in on APP2 circuit, and I'm going to turn the dial and watch the voltage change after it cleared the code, obviously, and it would change. And I'm like, well, this is really weird. It shows me that potentially the circuit should be good, right? But do I have another defective part? Okay, try one more.
Yeah.
Same damn thing. And I'm like, all right, I've had enough of this. So I find the connector at the PCM, unplug it, find the correct pins that go to APP2, and physically load test every circuit. And I'm getting frustrated, right? Because the bulb is like lighting bright. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then I had a one of my other coworkers, I'm like, get up here and help me follow this harness and just, manipulate it, move it wherever, and we finally got the light to go out. And I'm like, check that jumper lead, make sure it didn't fall off. No, it didn't fall off. Move that harness back, and then sure, the light came on. I'm like, oh, I think we're onto something. And it goes right below the cooling fan, or where the radiator sits into the front core support. We pull it back, peeled back. The sheath wasn't even all the way broken, that corrugated tubing, but we open it up, and sure as hell, the signal wire and like the low reference were like rubbed and grounded together. There was green spots, and I'm like, how the hell does that happen?
Oh, wow.
How the hell does my load testing work most of the time? And how the hell with my potentiometer did it still make the signal adjust on there? And I'm just like, even if you do everything right in your testing methods, you can still get burned by a damn wire, and it still happens occasionally,
Yeah.
And it's frustrating, but you work through it, and you won't get burned by it again.
You try to think of all the variables when you're going through this stuff. Like, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm to a conclusion. I've done these tests. It's showing me this. And then I'm like, well, what if this really weird thing happened? Would it, be showing me these results, but really be something else? And then I'm like, okay, well, how do I prove that, or how do I test for that scenario? And you can't think of them all. That's the problem. But I've been in situations like you're referring to there, or that comes into mind, and I'm just like, well, what if the two wires were kind of corroded and touching each other? Could that be the scenario? Well, I better check for that. And, sometimes I do way more testing that's necessary, but it's what you got to do.
Right.
Because there's weird stuff out there. There's strange problems you don't see coming unless you've been through this.
And that's, kind of after thoughts that I had too, because we're dealing with, low current wires, right? So I'm like, well, how did I miss this? Because, load testing them, even with an ohm meter, none of them are shorted together. It'd say, OL on my meter. And I'm like, well, scratching my head and, trying to think about it. But, that corrosion, like you said, and I've watched it in a lot of like, scanner danner videos and stuff too, and it makes sense because corrosion, or even like your body, you can transfer voltage, through essentially, but at the same time, it can still be shorted. So I don't know if I'm saying it right, but so you have your potentiometer. It wasn't dead shorted, so the PCM was still seeing a change, but maybe not quite in the parameters it needed to. It was just enough corrosion, just enough continuity to skew that signal wire back, or the low reference, and the PCM was just like, nope, I'm not happy setting the code. So, visual, and this one wouldn't have turned up in a visual inspection. We've had to really manipulate the harness and move it around to get it to happen. But, school's always in session. I learn something new every day, no matter how many years you do it. I'm sure you do too. But it's stuff you put up in your memory bank.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That one's not going to burn me again. It's every day is a learning experience. And that's one thing I really enjoy about it, because people see it and get frustrated and can easily say, get this thing to the dealer, we can't fix it. And, and I'm like, no, I'm finding out what's wrong with this. I came into work, early, half hour, 40 minutes. So it wasn't even technically on the clock. I'm like, we're getting to the bottom of this. This is not going to kick my ass, and then find it, fix the wire. Everybody's happy. So.
That's right. That's what it's all about, man. It's never boring. That's for sure. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you spending some time with me. It's nice to get to meet you, and we're actually not too far from each other, so we'll probably have to meet up one of these days in person. Yeah,
if you're ever in the Fargo area, feel free to reach out or message me and give you my number, and we should do lunch or something sometime. And yeah, this is great. I'm glad you had me on there. I've listened to a lot of them there, and I like shop talk and like getting on there with you. So I'm grateful to be on your show. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, definitely. And same goes for you if you're in the Twin Cities area at all. Just hit me up and We'll grab lunch or dinner or something. I'd be happy to do that. Always great to meet people in the industry. So
Yeah, especially ones with similar interests in the industry too. Bounce ideas off of and different ways of thinking. That's always a game changer when you can collaborate and network a little bit.
Yes, sir. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode. Another big thank you to Chris for joining me on the show today. That was great. Also like to thank everybody out there for listening to the show. Really appreciate it. But with that all out of the way, let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.